Okay, so this is part 4 of tonight's event on Opportunity Zone Meetup. Our topic for this evening has to do with options for real estate owners that come out of their land being designated within an opportunity zone. This is an open forum where we're going to raise some additional issues, make some additional observations, answer your questions, and try to help you walk out of the room fully educated and dangerous enough to go out and do a project tomorrow. So Ross, I know you had a dozen questions in your pocket. Why don't you lead off with a question you would like for us to answer?
Yeah. Well, I want to start with the requirement that the real estate or property needs to be purchased basically after the end of 2017, from 2018 onwards. What difference does that make? Let's start at the top.
Yeah, so this has been part of the proposed rules. As you may be aware, there are 2 sets of proposed rules. One was created in October of last year, which was primarily real estate oriented. And then in April of this year, they came out with the second set, which is primarily business oriented for opportunity zones. And this was in the original rules as they came out. And it is simply stated that a person who's holding property can't just roll it into an opportunity zone project and get tax benefits. And somebody drew a line in the sand and said, well, you can, but you can't have more than 20% carried interest in that project. And then because of the way they structured opportunity zones and funds, the money has to be a capital gain to begin with. So they have to liquidate the property if they're going to use the same property. I have some people who have their own capital gains independent of the property, so that may not be an issue. That has to be an equity investment into the fund, and then the fund has to make an equity investment into a business or directly into the property in order to meet all the check boxes there. And at the end of the day, if you originally own the property, you're not allowed to have more than a 20% direct interest in that property. And I think the primary reason for that, which Nate spoke to a little bit in the last section, is that they're looking for money to come into an economic, into the area that's distressed to make something happen. They want money to get to work. So if you just moved it sideways, they're going, we don't want to give you a tax benefit for doing that unless you're bringing enough cash with it that you're going to be stirring the pot very vigorously with that. So my best guess interpretation on what's going on here is somebody said, well, if you match the value of the property 4 to 1 or your investment 4 to 1 or some combination of that, that's going to cause enough economic activity that we're going to allow you to do it. But for you to qualify, you have to either bring other capital gains to the table, or you're going to have to sell your property and roll it back through the fund, limited to the extent of your capital gains, and drop it down to the business to get there. So that's my best guess on what's there. There's been relatively little written on this in any of the publications, and even the people who were sponsors and drafters of the bill, there hasn't been much commentary other than to default back to, we want more money to come into this area. So I think that's pretty much what you're looking at as a guideline for what's going on. And that's why I think that there's some ways in which this may work where you can bring other money, but it's going to have to come through other entities. So you might have 80% ownership of a development company, and it could put money in here as long as it's not the same one that was the original title owner to the property to begin with. And that might allow you to end up in a stronger ownership position. If you're not seeking the tax benefit from the opportunity zone, then you could own 99% of the company or 100% of the voting stock or any other combination, and you're just bringing money in like any third-party investor who happens to be getting tax incentives and therefore is a greater reason to invest in you rather than somebody else. And they could be a silent partner, any number of things. And there is no limit on your ownership because you're not getting any of the carried tax benefits.
So then just so I'm because I'm a little confused about it, but why is there a requirement that the property has to be acquired after 2017? Why is that requirement still in place?
Repeat the question.
So the question is, why did they draw a line in the sand in 2017? I don't have a good answer to that question. Again, I think that they had to put a starting line in somewhere. The bill took effect January 1 of 2018. So essentially at that point in time, they're saying, we're now going to reward these types of investments into these communities. And so if you already held the property prior to that, you're a loser in one sense of not getting the full benefit. At the same time, if you happen to own property in an opportunity zone and it's designated opportunity, even though you don't get the tax benefits, you now have an appreciated value in the property without having put any dollars into it. So it's kind of a mixed bag of where you're at. You may not get the same things that the investors get, but you're still not losing on the proposition.
Right, so then what's available to somebody that owns a property that they acquired before 2018? What benefits can they get out of this program?
So this is what Nate was talking about earlier. The three primary benefits that you could approach this on. One is just to say, hey, my land value went up.
Sell it.
I'm going to sell it. I'm going to make more money than I would have made otherwise. And you may be sitting on property you couldn't sell before, and now it's crossed this threshold. Some of the earlier programs, we've got a picture of an amusement park where it says you can't ride this ride if you're under 42 inches. And this was for a program where we say, who's truly benefiting from opportunity zones? Well, if it's a really great project, they don't need opportunity zones in order to bring money to them. Somebody's going to invest in that project anyway. And a lot of the projects we're seeing and funded early on were real estate projects that were going to get their investment anyhow. And so some of the complaint about opportunity zones is wealthy people are benefiting because they're going to get wealthier by putting money into something they would have done anyway. And I've tried to explain to people, I don't care. As long as money's coming into a distressed, lower economic income neighborhood, it's helping that neighborhood, whether it comes from a rich person or a poor person or somewhere in between. If you're going to benefit the community in that fashion, fine. The second one is that, hey, I was going to develop the property, but I've been having a hard time raising money. Back to that 42-inch. Now, by doing the investors getting that opportunity zone tax benefit, it isn't going to double the value of the investment. It's merely going to bump your net ROI anywhere from 3 to 8% on a real estate deal. That's the numbers that are generally bandied about. If you're doing a business that might be a high flyer business, like Jeff Skaman's phone app that he's working on, that company might be worth 100 times its value in the next 3 years. Well, that whole upside is all tax-free to an opportunity zone investor. So you can make a far more money on the business than you can on the real estate. But in this case, if you can attract money in, you couldn't attract otherwise because you're more competitive. You've got this extra benefit, so they don't invest it outside. They don't invest it in an urban area where they don't really need the money, like Rhino at the moment. Even though Rhino is in the edge or crosses over into an opportunity zone, then you've got an advantage there. The last one is think about it from this standpoint. I'm going to develop the property. I was going to need to put a whole bunch of money into this anyway. Say I've got $1 million in the property, and it's going to take me 10 to 20 million to develop it out. Well, you're going to have to raise money and give up equity anyway. And so if you roll it through this process and you still end up with a 20% interest in the project, but you have all the money you need for development, and as long as that development is more than 5 times your investment, you're okay. So it isn't like you're barred from benefiting from it, but you do have to jump through some extra hoops if you want to get the maximum benefit out of it.
So let's say that we're on the other side of the equation. We actually decide to make an investment now or after the cutoff, or the beginning of the program after the cutoff date. Do we still have that limitation of 20% of ownership in that land Or can we own it outright? Can the business own 100% and I own the business? I sell
Let me
100%.
make sure I understand your question. So you're saying you purchased property after January 1st, 2018?
Let's say I haven't purchased anything.
Okay.
I'm here at the class, I'm learning this information, and now I'm interested in investing in opportunity zones. And I go and I'm interested in purchasing real estate, which is what I do. So can my opportunity zone business, which I own 100%, own 100% of that land?
It would be your fund.
Or the fund, or am I limited
You would
to
create
that
a fund and then it
Is that
might be
20% rule only for properties that I owned previously to 2007?
The
Okay.
question is, if you're a brand-new investor in the property after January 1st, 2018, there is no restriction on how much of that you own. And we have people who are doing this now who've done single project, single investor. I've worked with 3 or 4 people who have doing multiple projects. They've cashed out of one. They've now rolled that into a fund and rolled it into a business where they control both the fund and the business, and they're the sole investor, and they own 100% of that project. And there's no limitation on it at that time because the money all came in after 2018 to a brand-new property that they did not have a prior interest in.
So I already bought land in a no zone using 1031 exchange funds. Okay, so that would be almost like having owned it before 2017 in essence, right? Because I used,
What day did you buy that land?
I bought it in October, November.
Of last year?
Yeah.
You're right, okay. So,
But I used 1031 exchange
right,
funds.
right. The thing is, you use 1031 money to buy the property originally. So you've got a tax situation there that if you sell the property at this point in time and you don't do another 1031 exchange,
Right.
then you're going to have a capital gains event that's going to occur.
Right.
You already own the property, but you might do something similar to what we've proposed here, which is that you could sell the property to yet another entity, recognize your capital gains, come out of your 1031. It may not work. We're not saying this is a perfect solution, just saying it's possible.
Yeah.
It may not be the right choice either, but you could take your capital gains, roll them into a fund, and have more money come in to match yours to develop the property. So you've got, what, 40 acres down there? And you were thinking about putting a casino or something. No, I'm just kidding. Say you're going to put in a hemp processing plant, which is a topic of high interest in Colorado right now. You're looking at spending $5 to $10 million to do that. You could potentially sell out, roll your money up, roll it up through a fund and down, and then have $4 million come in to match your money. And now your capital gain is still going forward within the fund, within the project, leveraged by other people's money. The benefit of doing that, which may be the primary reason you might look at it, is when in the 1031 rollover, you have to roll over 100% of what you had in the property. Here you're only rolling over the capital gain. So depending upon what your gain is relative to your original basis, this may free up a lot of cash for you that you can use any way you want to. And you can even come back into the business and do a sidecar, what they call sidecar investment, one that's outside of the fund but into the same business. Or you could put it to something else. So what we've seen a lot of people, particularly in the farming community, who've been doing 1031s, is they get to a point, particularly near retirement, and they're saying to themselves, I need to take some money out for healthcare reasons, or I'm going to do something else. So they stop the 1031. But this allows them to roll the capital gain into an Oz investment so they're not going to get taxed on that portion of it, but it frees up that original basis for any of a number of things, send their grandkids to college or whatever else they may want to do. But at this point, it becomes a very individual case-by-case situation because you have to look at your capital gains versus your basis. You have to look at your goals, short and long term. There's a variety of other options that come into play there, and yet at the same time, with some of these enhancements that we were talking about earlier, there may be a reason to repackage your investment to get a better yield out of it. That it's not just limited to opportunity zones, but also includes one of these other programs.
Or if you, so, oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
And then if I were to use other money, liquidate other money that has gain, and use that to develop it, from what I read, then I have to match the amount that I put into with 1031 money, or I have to match. Depends on how it's divided up between land and building is what I think I'm reading.
So your question you're asking is refers to what we're now calling the enhancement rule. So if you invest in property through a opportunity zone fund, under certain situations, you are required to make an improvement to the buildings on that land in a dollar amount equal to the portion of the property that's attached to the building. So let's take your 40 acres.
Which I own privately.
I understand.
Not in a fund.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, because a minute ago you said,
yeah.
okay.
So this is, new question, new answer. So say you created a fund, and the fund invested into this property. It bought your property from you.
The fund does need to buy the property.
Unless the fund's buying your property, the enhancement rule doesn't apply. I'm just saying, if you created a fund and you decide to roll it like you did, we talked about here, and you bought your property from yourself with other people's money coming into play, or your own money in whatever fashion we call that, you are now required to make enhancements to the buildings on that property in an amount equal to the original value. So say you bought the property for $1 million, hypothetically. The buildings on the property were $250,000 and the land was $750,000. And you rolled it through this process, you would now have to make another improvement upon that building equal to $250,000. And again, the purpose of that is that they don't want to give a tax incentive unless you're bringing more cash into this particular project.
Follow up on that. You said in certain cases that's required. Which are the cases where we could avoid that type of enhancements?
Right. So one of the things that is a clear waiver on this rule is it's called the 5-year use rule. So if the property has not been actively used for the 5 prior years, then you do not have to make an enhancement. And an example of that is that Jeff Skaman is looking to buy the prison in Brush and convert it from a prison into a multi-use commercial center. The prison's been closed for 9 years. There's been no use of it during the last 5 years. So regardless of what the purchase price is, he doesn't have to make any enhancements to the property at all. They're just happy that we've converted an unused, underutilized asset now into a utilized asset. We've seen some other buildings around that. A lot of the historic buildings that are now being acquired into opportunity zones, including the one that we're going to use as the case study that I'm presenting on October 1st. It was the old high school in Florence, and it hasn't been used for 10 years.
Any other way to get around that?
I think there are, and there's some nuances about where you're at in the development cycle. And one of them was that, say you're building a 20-unit apartment complex. During the development phase, if you invest there, but before you open your doors and start renting the property, then the use changes because you went from a development phase to an operational phase. And according to them, since you weren't renting prior, then if you're still throwing dollars into development, you don't have to double down in the same fashion. So there's some other places we're looking at this, and these, unfortunately, these are some of the gray areas that we don't have a lot of good interpretation on. But yeah, that's one of the ones that I saw that came up in one of the panel discussions by some tax experts was, where are you in the development cycle? So if you come in before they start renting, you may still be able to do something like, I think part of the question there was, we're going to build 10 units. I built 2 of the units. and I still have 8 units yet to build. Well, you could come in and put in the other 8 units, and you've doubled the investment at that point.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, but isn't there also an issue of the actual use of the land itself? If you change like the substantial use of the land from, say, just a real estate play to also a business project, isn't there also a way you can get around that?
Yeah, there's some really vague references in the statute to a change of use, and I can't say I understand what they're trying to talk about there, but it does suggest that if you took it from like a school to a swimming pool or something, that might be
From a prison to a commercial.
yeah,
Yeah,
it might be a change of use that might also give you an exemption. But what we do with questions like that is we write them down and we go ask people and see if we can get an answer. If we do, we'll post it up on our discussion board on the meetup site, and we'll put it into the guide when we publish it.
That I get this, as it pertains to real estate and only real estate in opportunity zones, the majority of situations, if we invest in a property, we have to improve it by at least 80% of the value.
You have to double the value of the portion represented by the building.
But that's in the majority, so as a real estate investor, pretty much.
Most projects, that's what they're looking for. They're assuming, and that's why we talked a little bit off camera about a non-qualified investment would be like a fully rented commercial building. You're not going to be able to do anything to the building to enhance it. So they're saying all you're doing is moving money sideways, and that's not bringing new money. It's not creating the economic activity that you want within the zone, so it's not going to qualify.
It kind of goes back to that point of they don't want people to just fall into a windfall of money. So they want the person to at least put a lot of development into whether it's tearing down the foundation or adding.
As we talked about off camera, the problem that I have with it is that as an investor, that kills about 90% of the deals because it really becomes a development play.
Right, and to that point, and to one of the questions Ross was raising before the program, the question is, what can you do to a property that might meet the enhancement threshold?
I mean, 80% or 100% is a lot of money. You have to.
It's 100%. You've got to double down minimum. So the question is, we've talked about, could you, on a fix and flip, you may never get there with a standard fix and flip. If you put a mother-in-law cottage in the back, or you did a pop-up, you might get there, or you might combine that with putting solar on the roof or doing some kind of insulation thing. You might be able to do some environmental improvements. But sooner or later, yeah, it's going to be very, very tough to take any, I will say, reasonable quality property or above and make enough enhancements in it and still make it something you can make your money back on. Unless you're in a neighborhood where you're seeing I'll say, an escalating gentrification taking place that wouldn't necessarily be a sound investment maybe, but unless you're a crapshooter, then you might say, yeah, I don't care. No matter how much I put into this, it's going to be worth twice as much next year because we just raised minimum wage to $15 an hour or something, and which was the announcement made at 10 o'clock today here in Denver. And I'm curious to see how the business community reacts to that announcement.
I'm going to calculating the double in value. So we have land, building, so we're going to split the two out in terms of value. So how do we determine what value goes to the land, what value goes to the building? Are we talking about something like, are we looking at the basis, so if we've held it for a while? Are we adding in all our costs, the normal stuff that you can do to add to basis? That's kind of, the math is obviously very important there.
Yeah, I think that what you're going to be looking at in order to calculate the building and the land is you're going to go through a normal appraisal approach where you would say, if this was a vacant lot, what would it be worth? Okay, and not, if you're doing improvements to the land for either hookups or any other thing, those are all improvements. And so one of the ways you would go about it would be to ask yourself what represents equivalent in a comparative appraisal for just the land. And there should be an ability for an appraiser to give you that number, and you may have to pay for one if you think you're pushing the envelope a little bit. But we've seen a lot of properties where you go, yeah, it doesn't matter, you know, the building's 100,000, we're gonna put 500,000 into it, we're nowhere near the edge, it doesn't matter.
Well, on the smaller fix and flip projects, if you want to call them, particularly residential stuff, you know, it's hard to get to double the basis.
Well, and that's the question that was just on the table, is that there are a lot of properties, and it was estimated as much as 90% of the properties out there will never qualify for Opportunity Zone because of the enhancement rule. And, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of good that could be done in that manner. And that's where we've been talking about, is there a way to not invest in the property, but to invest in a business where the business is managing properties or enhancing properties in a way so this is not treated as a property investment, but as a business investment that could still get you to the same point. And I've worked with a couple fix and flip models, particularly in communities of color, and we were going through the same kind of analysis of, well, what could we do over here that would not be tantamount to buying and selling real estate or flipping inventory in real estate. And there are some ways you could go about doing that where you could get into equity sharing in the property where you don't take down 100% of the property. You do something with the owner in place. You could do some of the environmental stuff we were talking about to improve the conservation or create power generation for the property. And you're going to be looking at something that's non-standard. And as once you get into equity sharing with 2 or more owners, you are also going to be disqualified from most of the federal mortgage programs because they don't allow for that.
So I have a question with regard to the to where you are in the redevelopment. So in my particular case, I have a permit-ready office plan that has not been built out, and I've got the asset that can be sold to an opportunity fund. I've also got the business piece that could be funded. But if the opportunity fund bought the real estate, would building that out, taking down the permit, building out qualify instead of doubling the improved value of the
So the question is, if you sold the property to an Opportunity Zone fund or development business, Opportunity Zone business, would any of these improvements, enhancements, meet the enhancement rule? And it's in the development phase. It's in the development phase, and so as I understand it, unless we find this exemption for change of use, you're going to have to put as much money into it as what the person paid for the property. So say they bought the property from you for $1 million, they'd have to put another $1 million into it to meet the rule. If it should qualify for one of these uncertain things, there might be an ability to avoid that. But I think that for the most part, you're going to, if you're going to go down the path where you're treading on the edge, you're going to want a CPA and to advise you, maybe write an opinion letter telling you that this looks like you're coloring inside the lines. And unfortunately, I've found few CPAs are up to speed in this area. We have a number that we know of who have been speakers or experts on different panels, or you're getting actually into tax attorneys with some of the law firms. But I would make sure that whoever you're asking for that opinion understands what the rule is and why it's there. And the fact that the rules are not finalized, it creates another level of uncertainty to the whole thing.
Do you think there'll be a delay on the 7-year window? Do you think they'll move it to 2020? Or is that going to stay rigid at 2026?
So the question is, do I think that the current 7-year time period, which is one of the triggers for the maximum benefits, whether it will change, and I'm going to step back and re-explain the rule just to make sure everybody follows this. So right now, if you invest in an Opportunity Zone fund, you get an immediate deferral of your capital gains taxes until you come out of your investment. If you leave it in your investment for a minimum of 5 years, your taxes are going to be reduced by 10%. If you leave it in for 7 years, you get an extra 5% or a maximum of 15% reduction over the 7-year time period. as the laws were crafted, right now, you would need to make an investment by December 31st of this year to have the ability to hold for the minimum of 7 years in order to get that 15%. And I'm going to throw a guess back in answer to your question. I'm going to say probably not immediately, meaning that from the standpoint of what they're trying to achieve, they want to get money into these areas now. So if they start sliding the 7-year time period, they're reducing the urgency to make an investment in these communities. The other thing, and there's two answers to this, depending upon whether you have a lot of money or a little money. To a small dollar investor, the difference between a 15% reduction in your tax and a 10% reduction in your tax is not going to be that consequential. So you may still make the investment anyway. It may not be impedance or a reason for you not to make the investment. If we're talking about the large institutional investors who are putting in $10, $100 million into a project, the difference between 15% and 10% becomes a sizable amount, and those institutions have a lot of influence over the people who make the laws. So I can't give you any real good forecast on how that might go. My best guess is, from everything we're hearing, is there is a lot of pro advocacy to make this work, but at the same time, a lot of people at different portions, there's not making everybody happy, or there's some complaints that the rich are getting richer. So they may not touch this for a year or two. Now, it wouldn't surprise me, more likely, that 2 years down the road, then they might do something that might give you that extra point. So they might change the 10% and extend it a couple of years. But right now, I'm not anticipating anything in the short term to change it, because I think everybody views this as an interesting experiment. This is a different type of incentive from all the other incentives that are out there. And the question on the table for a lot of people is, this better or worse than the other incentives?
So when you get to that year 7, you've now rolled your money into a fund, and you get to year 7, do you have to pay on the original amount, or if as long as it's in the fund, you don't suffer a tax consequence?
No, in year 7, which right now is 2026, all taxes become due on your current tax liability.
So you have to bring it out of a different place?
Well, it depends on how you've structured your fund. So the question there is, if you structured your fund in a particular fashion, you will need to bring in money from some other source in order to pay those particular taxes. What we're seeing to a large degree is that most of these opportunity zone investments are generating ordinary income from rents or something else during the course of this time period. And depending upon the level of success and growth of that particular opportunity, there may be far more cash than you need in order to pay your taxes at the end of that time period.
Some kind of annual distribution of some sort?
Yeah, and again,
set it aside too. Maybe have it written within the agreement itself.
well, and this it depends on the structure at that point, because if you've put it into a corporate structure, the money's all caught up within the corporation, and so there is no distribution of cash specifically for that purpose. Most of the current opportunity zone funds and businesses are being structured as partnerships or LLC or pass-through entities, so ordinary income would come through. As an example, the New Mexico fund that I'm working with, we've set up the fund and the businesses as LLCs. We're anticipating ordinary income and even some potential capital gains to accrue through this. So, for example, we invest in Business ABC. It's an LLC. We're holding 10–20% of ownership after our investment. So they distribute income to us for our share, which cascades through the ladder to the investors in the Opportunity Zone Fund. So we're anticipating enough money coming through this to pay whatever taxes come due. If it's in a pure corporate form, that won't happen, and then yes, you may be looking to outside cash, or you may need to do a form of distribution, and there we're getting into some more gray areas over what's a permissible distribution within a corporation that does not undo your investment. And that's an area that still needs some clarification. I will point out one other thing is that on the case study that we're working with using whole life insurance, the investors in that case borrowed against the cash value of their whole life insurance and bought the policy, and the policy will generate enough cash by the time they get to year 7 to make the tax payment for them. So again, there's different ways of attacking this particular problem, but that speaks to the issue when you start this thing. How is it being structured? What are the anticipated cash flows over the life of this, and how will it help you or not help you pay those taxes in 2026? All taxes come due at that time.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and it's only a question of whether you're paying 100%, 90%, or 85% of the taxes, depending upon when you started your investment.
Well, I think the obvious thing that's missed in that whole discussion is that when you have that initial sale to create the capital gain that you're going to roll over, you're really only reinvesting the capital gain.
Right.
So you have all the capital in your hand right now, if there is, which there probably is.
But you owe tax on the stuff you retain, right?
No, so let me speak to that. So what Ross is pointing out, that the maximum capital gains rate today is around 25%. And I think it's not, is it
State.
the state is actually waiving the capital gains tax on opportunity zone investments to follow the federal statute, just to let you know.
Oh.
So
It's 20%.
Oh.
That paid for your whole trip up here. So yeah, no, that was clarified. Jenna Persky at a conference recently said that the state statute as written will mirror the federal statute, so you'll get a deferral in the same manner.
A deferral,
Yeah, deferral.
but you're still gonna,
You're still going to owe taxes.
in 7 years, you're still gonna owe it.
You're still going to owe
Okay,
taxes.
so that's 10% state, 20 federal.
Yeah,
So it's 30 total.
yeah.
Okay.
And so the point that Ross is making is that the capital gains rollover is on your capital gains, and if your tax is 25%, you still have whatever your original basis or principal was that you might use as a form of paying off that tax in the
If you
future.
retain it, like in a 1031, anything you keep, you have to pay tax on.
Yeah, but there's not a 1031, that's why we're saying.
Okay. So I had
This is the
misunderstood
benefit
that
of
earlier.
this structure.
So you're just placing the gain,
Just the gain.
and you can place the gain off of stocks and bonds and whatever.
Yeah, and you can use it from different sources, and this is another question that comes up repeatedly to me, is that, and it works with the whole life insurance, they're going, well, what if we buy the whole life insurance, we borrow against it, and then we make an opportunity zone investment? There's no problem with that, as long as you have an investment over here in an opportunity zone fund and you have a capital gain over here, they don't care if you went to Vegas and played roulette and lost it and won it back and then reinvested it, or you did 10 things with your money. As long as you do it in the time frame, they don't care. All they're going to look at is your tax return. Yes, you had a capital gain. Yes, you invested in an opportunity zone this amount of money. That amount of money, that tax is deferred. So, yeah, you got personal tax strategies, you've got the individuality, and at some point, these are not even good general guidelines, they're just kind of pieces of information that we're pasting together. But there are places where you'll ask questions, and we're like, that's a really good question, and I don't just say that just to fill up time while I'm trying to come up with an answer. I don't have an answer, we're going to have to go find one. Yes?
So, if one were to buy, let's say, an apartment, or a multiple homes on one property, what if you renovate one of the homes? Or is it that one home's value that you have to match? Or do you have to match the value of all the buildings?
Okay, so the question is, if you buy, say, a multi-family unit, 4 units, 8, 12, 34, whatever, 100, if you buy it with opportunity zone funding, then you have to enhance 100% more the value of the buildings you acquired.
All the buildings.
It doesn't have to be all the buildings. You could scrape one and put up a 40-foot, Empire State Building, and it would, as long as you spend the same amount of money on the property as what it costs to acquire.
As the value of all the buildings.
All the buildings.
If you're, let's say there's 5 buildings.
Right.
But you're only putting the business into one of those buildings. The others are just sitting there.
Right. So for example, again, using your.
We're back to this, how do you value
Right, so, but you would look at the value, all the buildings you acquired.
all the buildings, even though you're only gonna touch one?
It doesn't matter, the question is they're going, unless you separate it. If you
Yeah,
subdivide it
parcel
and
it
did some
out.
other
But you have
thing,
to subdivide the property.
you might have to do that in advance in order to craft how you go about it. But you could, I mean, and this is where the farm question is, this is an area that gets really gray in a hurry, because they're going, well, you didn't do anything to land. I'm farming, that's a business, you know? So was it a property acquisition or was it a business acquisition?
Yeah.
It seems to be a metaphysical question for which there is no clear answer. But if you bought a piece of property and you put any kind of building on that property, it's probably disproportionate, you know, anyway. And if there's just raw land, there is no enhancement.
Well, and it appears what I bought, you know, not understanding all of this, of course, all the values in broken down barns, all kinds of broken down barns. The land itself actually has very little value.
That's not uncommon in a rural area. We're seeing that a lot, where if you look at comps on farmland across the United States or anywhere, you're looking somewhere between $1,000 an acre to $10,000 an acre for the land if it's got irrigation or other attributes to it. The building on the property tends to be the single greatest component of valuation. And again, you could do comps on that to see where it's at. What we've generally seen in most of these cases, though, is that like a property we're looking to acquire and develop a greenhouse on out in Delta, it's a $575,000 property. The building, the water rights by themselves are $175,000 of the $575, so that's separated out. The land is 20-some acres at probably $3,000 an acre, so you take that out of the equation. The buildings, whatever's left, needs to be cleaned up. It's going to be really hard to retrofit that building, though, to make this work. But if we put more improvements on the entire project, I mean, we don't enhance.
Building only that you have to match.
Yeah, building
Building
only that you have to match. So if we put in a brand-new greenhouse that's $5 million next to it, it's no problem.
And you're enhancing one building, even though there's maybe 4 or 5 buildings.
You want to scrape or put into an historic farm or something, yes.
Is it still the value of the one building, or you have to take
You have
all
to
4 or
make
5 buildings?
investment that is equal to the value of the building. Whether you,
What if there's multiple buildings?
it doesn't matter.
Okay, so if there's multiple buildings, and you're only gonna touch one of them, it's still the value of all the buildings?
All the buildings, right? Yeah, they just basically said, land here, buildings here, whatever the value of the buildings is, that's what you have to double down on. And in some cases, as we've been talking about, it's not practical to do that. It's not going to be, it's doable, but it's not practical.
Right.
You'll have to
So-
be creative, like potentially, like you said, solar panels, something that could add like other tangible property to it that could create the equivalent value.
Yeah,
Maybe
so-
like a data.
The solar panels on top of the barn.
Well, or you
could be
could,
worth more.
you can do a small solar farm, or there's a number of other things you can do that might actually have value, or sell electricity through, or some number of things. But yeah, you're gonna have to get into something that's not normal.
Well, what do you have to spend the money on? So you have to double the basics here, right? So what do you have to spend the money on?
So the definition of the rule on what you have to spend the money on is enhancement. Enhancement is not limited. So whether you put on a new roof, you put on an extra room, whether you put solar on it,
Irrigation
you build
system.
another building on the same property, those all are viewed as enhancements.
Engineering services?
Anything, yeah, and so, and I'll speak to that from a standpoint of co-pays funding. A lot of you may not be familiar, but Colorado is one of many states that allows you to either retrofit or build a new building that improves the environmental status of your buildings. And if you do that in the right way, in the right county in this state, that money can be borrowed from a third party and it's paid back out of property taxes. And so there, using their guidelines, any design, any engineering, any preparatory work, any installation, you know, anything up to operations is all fair game.
So now jumping ahead to new residential housing construction. Okay. If I take delivery of a new home from a builder that he's just completed and no one's ever lived in, and I take it in and I rent it out, so I put it into a trade or business, and does that qualify as original use?
That's one of the questions I was mentioning earlier about whether or not it's in development, then moving to occupation constitutes a change in use and makes a difference in the term original use for purposes of this rule. And as I understand it right now, until they start renting it or occupying it, it's not original, it doesn't become original use till you're doing something with it.
So I'm approaching builders right now, and I'm structuring a double transaction. So the first transaction is I want to acquire the land, and then I want to contract them to then put the house on. So instead of me just going and buying the finished product, I'm looking to buy the land and then put the improvements onto the land, even though the land has no substantial improvement requirement anyway, because it's vacant.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that, but I'm having problems explaining it to them, one, and then I'm having problems with their funding and financing as to how they do drawdowns on all the money that they've borrowed to do everything. And it's a little tricky. And right now they don't really want to listen to me because things are going great. But I'm anticipating when things aren't going great that their ears will be wide open.
Well, yeah, so what you're talking about is a land development project, single residence, and yes, in that case, the land does not have to be enhanced because there's no buildings on it, so there's no requirement or opportunity zone. You could create a fund, raise the money, and you could use that money as a down payment and leverage that with a commercial mortgage and build the building. And whether you use 1, 2, or 3 lenders between construction loan and so forth is whatever you want to structure it at. The purpose of the Opportunity Zone money, where you're going to get the most bang for the buck, is for the down payment on what would constitute the cost of the total finished building and to cover whatever property that you're going to do. But you don't have an enhancement rule. So in talking to a lender, I wouldn't even talk about Opportunity Zone to the lender because it's confusing to them if they don't understand it. I just simply say...
I'm not talking to the lender, I'm talking to the builder.
Okay, well, the builder shouldn't care either because you're going to just say, I have a group of private investors. And he doesn't care whether they're Martians or Opportunity Zone investors. They just know that they have cash and it's going to be an equity-style investment.
Right. The small builders have no problem with the structure at all. The large national listed builders all have a problem with the way their money is tied up in the drawdown on the sale of the lots and the contracts. And there's just a lot of problems there where I'm just not explaining it in a way that they're receptive to it.
Well, that sounds like you need an expensive consultant to me.
I'll go to one of the large builders who are doing 2,000 units of Santa development, and I'll tell them, I want to buy 10 units from you, but I don't want to buy the finished product. I want to buy the land, and I want to contract you to finish the product. And it'll all come to the same price. We just do it in 2 steps. And I'm having problems with that structure because of the way they raise capital and the way they have drawdowns.
Right, and the question you're raising is, how would you step into an already planned community development? And I know that Sebastian Ventures, they're using some of this model and what they're doing up near DIA, where they've done all the horizontal improvement, and now they're inviting investors to come in and take down 1 or more lots and build it out. And there's some other things that come into play once it's platted so that you can do individual development. And the problems you're speaking to, unfortunately, I think have to do with who you're working with and their own internal rules, because by and large it shouldn't be an issue. But what you want to do is have them sell you the lot and then contract with them to build the property, and they're just not designed for that. That's outside of their business model. And you're correct. As long as they're fat and happy chunking out houses as fast as they can put them in the ground, they have no real reason to deviate from a successful business model. But at the point in time where selling those houses may become harder and you become a spec developer sitting on top of that, then there'll be a change of tune on that. But for the moment, I don't know how you would pitch that to have them change the rules, because you need them to change their internal rules on how they go about developing the property.
The small developers, no problem. Small
Yeah.
builders, no issue at all. People like Michael at Sebastian Partners, no problem at all. Completely gets it. It's just the big guys. But then the other problem, so then the solution for those guys is that if me acquiring that, or the fund acquiring that property at the final date of construction, before they put it into service, that would solve the problem, right?
Yeah, so the question is, when you do the acquisition, is technically the building done, or are you buying a partially finished building where they've got to put one more nail into the knocker on the door or something in order to finish construction? My understanding, there is a major distinction between those two stages, or a status in the project, and that needs to be looked into more. The other thing I might look at is, we talked about workforce housing, and currently affordable housing has blown up into an unworkable scenario. You might be able to get the attention of a large builder like that by offering to meet their requirements, if any, for workforce or affordable housing, and taking that off of their plate where they're going, I can't make any money on that anyway. But you might, through the private funding model that we've been kicking around, you might be able to make money on it and still meet the equivalent of affordable housing.
Right. Those bulkhead.
And that would, see, what you're doing is you're adding an additional benefit, one that they're having a hard time meeting right now. I mean, a lot of builders are going, I have no idea how to meet an affordable housing thing, because it's an upside down, I'm just throwing money out the door on that particular building.
Especially in a place like Boulder that very much needs access to affordable housing.
Or any of the resorts and other ones that we're talking to. We're having conversations with different places across the state where workforce housing is a serious, continuous, perpetual problem. And we're hoping that we can get a test case and prove that we can make money meeting the requirement privately without going through the machinations of the other programs. So that brings us to the end of Part 4. I am going to walk through tonight. I don't do this every event. Some of the resources that are available, we've added a number of new sources to the list that I want to bring to your attention. And these are other groups, other organizations, other individuals who are doing good things within the Opportunity Zone, are considered a source of knowledge and something that you may want to pay attention to. You'll be getting the slide deck tomorrow morning, so you don't have to worry about rapidly writing down everything I say or talk about. But the state of Colorado is continuing to be a major advocate for Opportunity Zones, and they are going to be putting on a conference October 1st. They're putting together the program now, and we'll see how that goes. But they've come out with some new programs. For those of you who are service providers, they are creating a directory now of all the service providers in the state who are supporting Opportunity Zones. Just came out this week. And there are some new micro programs to help them, which I'm still trying to, are going to be announced next week, I guess, or in 2 weeks.
So that's a grant up to $2,000?
Yeah.
What is that?
I don't know. I asked the question, and I have not been able to get a total answer to that yet. Then we have Ross, who's here tonight, who has created his own mapping of Opportunity zones within the state of Colorado, and has additional data beyond what's currently available at the state, which give you a better idea maybe about the community where the Opportunity Zone is located. So Ross is continuing to help us all out there. We then have the video recordings. All of you are familiar with the fact that every one of these events is recorded by Steve Maltz with AdCom, who does an awesome job. And typically within a week of the event, a week to 2 weeks, we'll get all the editing done, and it's posted up on YouTube, and we'll notify all of you when it's available and give you all the links. The video for the last event will be it's already posted, but it'll be labeled correctly with the right descriptors and hashtags sometime tomorrow morning before I leave town. Then we have a Facebook group. This is a relatively recent group that has come in under Opportunity Fund. They're sharing information and stories and so forth, and you can get a slightly different perspective, different look at the Opportunity Zone industry as it's evolving. We have the Oz Guide, which is put out by Mendora, and it's a pretty good ongoing source of information. Again, it's kind of like a newsletter or news magazine that talks about different projects going on. That can be a good place to look for ideas. This is the one I announced just a couple weeks ago. No, this is a new one. This is the Council of Development Finance Agency, CDFA. If you're doing anything in terms of economic development, urban planning, financing in a community at the municipal level, whatever, this is a top flight blue chip organization that puts on awesome programs all the time on this area. They're the ones who hosted the program on PACE financing yesterday. It's a 4-part, 8-hour program on PACE, and it was free. A lot of their stuff, there are price tags associated with it, but good quality, completely comprehensive and funding municipal projects of any shape, size, or form. Then we have this one. This is the directory that was published a couple weeks ago by the National Council of State Housing Authorities. This is a list of all the known opportunity zones that they're aware of the funds. So if you're looking for funding, you may find money from this source that aligns with your particular project. Now, most of these projects are hyper-local. A lot of them are very fixed or siloed as to what they're willing to look at, so your project may or may not be something of interest to them. But again, if you're getting into something that has either replication potential or it may be impacting a social cause, you may find something in here that matches up with you. So this is, as far as I know, it's the largest list of Opportunity Zone funds that exist in the United States. Then this is the Global Institute of Innovation Districts. As we've been working on embedding innovation into opportunity zones. This is a group that recently formed, and a lot of them are spin-offs from yet another institute, who's been doing work on innovation districts as a organized, local, hyper-local effort to instill economic growth based on innovation. And they just formed this new group, and they're getting more active into opportunity zones as it crosses over with what they're doing.
Is this in Colorado, or do you know what this is?
Most of these people are out of the East Coast. I'm sorry I can't recall the group they were with before, but it was more of a household name, large brand institute that does a lot of think tank stuff. And I've been following the work of the individuals for several years. And I think that they're going to, again, bring some new insight, different perspective to how you might want to look at an opportunity zone, regardless of where it's located. And then there's me. So last but not least, we have our meetup group. This is the link to it. We have a library, which is in development, and with Nate's switch to more incentivized work, we're expecting to see this improved a lot. And then I'm available for contact on working with the zone. Right now, there are lots of things going on. The knowledge base is increasing. The growth in opportunity zones is geometrically going up. It's looking more and more like a hockey stick all the time. And as more people become familiar and the communities get involved, more businesses jump into this, I don't see this thing slowing down for the next 2 to 3 years because the incentives are still on the back end, and they're still there for the having. So this is a list of resources to share with each of you. I'll get you the slide deck, And then they'll also be included in the guide that we're putting out, which is a more narrative, in-depth discussion that we're going to match up with every one of these events. We've got a couple out now, and we've got about a dozen to catch up, and we'll get that done. We're at 6 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank all of you for coming this evening, and more importantly, thank you for bringing all your questions with you, because this is exactly the kind of issues that we're all trying to answer, and where we can identify one with a solution, good for us. Where we need to do some more digging, that's okay. Nate's got nothing better to do than go to law school and work 3 jobs, you know, so he's happy to work on the questions, and then I'll try to figure out if we've got a solution or we're still working.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming to this event, Opportunity Zones Meetup, and you'll get that probably tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.